Hello and welcome. This is Spotlight Ukraine, the first episode of 2023. New year, new challenges. Can Soledar become a game-changing point in Russia-Ukraine's brutal war? Will Taiwan be the next country to be invaded by the super powerful neighbor? And made in Russia, the new products of Kremlin propaganda machine. Trends, world politics, and deep analytics made by the Ukrainian journalists to the whole globe. This is Spotlight Ukraine. More of this right now. A real hell. For the second week in a row, the city of Soledar in Donetsk region is the hottest spot on the front line. Russians directed the main blow there against the backdrop of many months of failures near Bakhmut, which is located 15 kilometers from this settlement. At the same time, Bakhmut continues to be attacked as well. Intense fighting is also ongoing for the control of Svatovo-Kreminna highway in Luhansk region. The situation at the front line and how local residents survive in the epicenter of the shelling, see in our latest review.
The cannonade of explosions in Soledar has been ongoing for the second week in a row. The situation is even more complicated than in the neighboring Bakhmut, which has been the hottest spot on the front line for the last months. The occupiers have sent the most professional fighters of the Wagner private military group to storm the city and are trying to attack from different sides. It's likely that the Russians now control a significant part of Soledar, the UK Ministry of Defense Intelligence reports. There are intense street battles.
Thanks to the resilience of our soldiers there in Soledar, we won additional time and forces for Ukraine. And what did Russia want to win there? Everything is completely destroyed, with almost no life left, and thousands of their people lost. The whole land near Soledar is covered with corpses of the occupiers and scars from the blows. This is how madness looks like.
Soledar became another city on the map of Ukraine, which was completely destroyed by the so-called Russian peace.
This is all my stuff. A jacket and a few suitcases. It's all I could pack. There are 2 cats in the box, already waiting for our trip.
60-year-old Olha left Soledar when Russian terrorists destroyed her second apartment. Over the past week, the woman says she didn't go outside at all, because it was like hell there.
There is no house left intact. Novokamenka near Soledar was dug into the ground completely, including residential areas. We literally don't have any houses intact, not a single one. Apartments were burning, breaking in half.
By advancing on Soledar, the enemy is trying to bypass Bakhmut, 15 kilometers from this city, from the south and north, as well as to complicate the supply of Ukrainian forces in this direction. The Russians have partially succeeded in the last one, but recent Russian gains in Soledar don't portend an imminent encirclement of Bakhmut, as it is presented by Russian propaganda media. The Institute for the Study of War emphasizes.
The enemy is trying to conduct offensive actions to reach the Soledar-Siversk road, which is important for the logistics of Bakhmut defense. They also want to approach the city from the west. But there are 7 and 11 kilometers respectively to be captured. During the 6 months of the offensive on Bakhmut, the enemy has advanced a shorter distance. So even if we imagine that the Russians will capture Soledar, this in no way affect the effectiveness of the defense of Bakhmut.
Come on, take 2 laughs and leave.
bread is being hastily distributed in Bakhmut to the sound of explosions. Loud statements of Russians that they would take the city by the new year remained empty promises. But they managed to destroy Bakhmut almost completely. The five-story building where 80-years-old Lydia Dmitrievna lives was also mutilated by Russian terrorists. The pensioner's apartment survived, but the windows were blown out and the balcony was damaged.
All this noise is unbearable. We get no sleep and we have no windows left in our apartment. I have all the necessities but no glass in the windows. All this darkness, we covered everything with foil, but it doesn't help much. It's hard to get up in the morning. No one could ever imagine this. Because it's so hard, I cry every day. I'm standing right now and my tears keep falling.
Bloody battles for Bakhmut have been going on since last summer. The invaders are using their soldiers as cannon fodder and don't count lives in their attempts to take the city. It's located on a supply line between Donetsk and Luhansk. Gaining control of Bakhmut could give Russia a stepping stone to advance on two biggest cities in Donetsk region, Kramatorsk and Slovyansk. And politically, it would allow Russian propaganda to compensate for the defeats on the battlefield in recent months. Bakhmut also has a symbolic meaning for the Ukrainian army. In addition, experts say the armed forces of Ukraine have built powerful defensive lines here, which would have to be rebuilt again. Therefore, our military don't plan to retreat.
If Russians creep in very actively, then we will kill them in great numbers. If they are not too active, then we do not fire intensively at their positions, but instead we fire at their bases. We have coordinates of targets, places where they hide.
Over the past week, some experts have reported an alleged breakthrough by the Ukrainian armed forces near the town of Kreminna, Luhansk region. However, there is no official confirmation. Since October, our military have been holding fire control over the Svatove-Kreminna highway, but cannot gain a foothold. The territory is completely mined, said the head of Luhansk region, Serhiy Haidai.
Russians are giving reinforcements to the direction of Kreminna because they are really giving up position there. There are places where the occupants are very close to our guys. I saw it with my own eyes. A forest belt 40 meters wide, separating the dug-in Russians on the other side and our defenders on the other side.
Meanwhile, according to the head of Ukrainian intelligence, Kyrylo Budanov, Ukraine is preparing a major offensive to liberate its territories next spring. The fiercest fighting, in his opinion, is expected in March.
It will be the most warm months of that period, before summer. It will be the most warm months.
Budanov also believes that the fate of the Russian-Ukrainian war will be decided in the next 6 months.
And now let's discuss the latest updates on the front line and the possible date of the ending of the war with Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Donald Trump. Hello and welcome.
Glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
So let's start with discussing the situation on the front line. So you might know that the situation in Soledar and Bakhmut, which are in the Donetsk region, are extremely difficult. So what should the Ukrainian troops do to knock down Russians out there?
Well, I think what we need overall that would be helpful, not just in that particular battle, but more generally, is to have a strategy to achieve the objective we all want, which is the removal of all the Russian troops. And I'm afraid that from the U.S. and NATO perspective, we have not contributed the strategic picture that would be very helpful. So in the immediate struggle now, I think on the battlefield, it's going to be difficult for the next several months because the Russians are dug in. So what that tells me is we need to appreciate on a big picture basis what additional weapons assistance the Ukrainian forces need, and not debate week by week by week, this weapon, that weapon, the next weapon. What's the strategy to win? That's what we should focus on, and then deliver the weapons accordingly.
Thank you. Ambassador John Bolton is with Spotlight Ukraine, and my next question is about Russia's strategy. So we know that Russia continues its mobilization, and we know that Russia continues to build up its forces, and some military experts say that Russia is preparing an attack on Kyiv or on the western regions to cut the artery of aid from the west. So how do you think, how realistic these plans are?
Well, I think that's certainly possible. I'd say two things. Number one, I think right now Putin and the Kremlin are going to try and focus on politics and diplomacy to split the Western alliance. I think they recognize their military's performance has been appallingly bad. Ukraine's has been superb. And that Putin now hopes to win diplomatically what he can't win on the battlefield, splitting NATO, as I say, and we must guard against that. But second, and I would say this to everyone in Ukraine, this recent decision by Putin to name Valery Gerasimov as their new field commander in this war is very significant and means we're in for some, I think, very difficult times ahead here. Gerasimov was Putin's pick to be, in effect, the chairman of their Joint Chiefs of Staff. And he's now said to Gerasimov, you're getting out from behind your desk and you're going to go win the war in Ukraine. Putin is, as we say, doubling down. He's pushing all of his chips to the center of the table. He will not be able to lay off responsibility for failure in Ukraine on anybody else. This is now his regime on the line. And maybe it was already, but he is making it clear he's not backing off anything. There is no negotiated settlement in sight here.
Oh, yeah, I see. Thank you. Donald Trump has repeatedly called for a reduction of the U.S. aid to Ukraine. So if he would still be the president of the United States, would it be good for Russia or for Ukraine?
Well, it would be very good for Russia, and I think that the NATO alliance would have been weakened and might have provided much less assistance to Ukraine. So it's fortunate for the United States and for Ukraine that Trump was defeated in 2020. I don't think he has a chance of becoming the Republican nominee in 2024. I think there are many other people who are potential candidates. And I think his influence within the Republican Party continues to diminish. There are isolationists in the Republican Party, as there are in the Democratic Party, but on both sides, they remain a small minority, and the overwhelming majority of American people, whatever their party affiliation, continue to support assisting Ukraine.
Thank you. Thank you from Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation to all the Americans for your support. In one of your interviews, you said that if Putin authorizes the use of nuclear weapon, he is going to be a legitimate military target. Has this message been heard in Kremlin?
Well, I don't know. I do my best to say it every time I get a chance. He is the ultimate commander of the Russian military forces. The use of nuclear weapons is a military decision. Putin would be a legitimate target, and he should be. And the reason I stress the personal responsibility is that we need to be looking for ways to deter Putin from using the nuclear weapon. And I think his own risk is the best deterrent that I can think of.
We all know that Putin will not stop invading and Ukraine will not stop defeating itself. So how long will the war last? Because some experts say it can be end till the midsummer of 2023. Some others say that the war can last for like a couple of years.
Yeah, well, we not only want to win this war, we want it with minimal additional damage to Ukraine. It's not enough to say we'll win someday. The objective should be to minimize casualties, to minimize further damage. So this goes to the point that I was trying to make a minute ago. You need a strategy to link your strategic objectives, restoration of full sovereignty and territorial integrity, with the resources that you have to achieve those objectives, and to do it in a timely fashion. I think that we have a collective problem here in not doing that effectively. That doesn't mean we're going to announce all of it publicly. We're not going to tell the Russians what the details of the strategy are. But if we had a better plan then we wouldn't go through this constant exercise of the government of Ukraine saying, well, we'd like this weapon and that weapon and the other weapon, and the White House saying, well, maybe yes, maybe no. Let's decide what our plan is, and then find the resources necessary to fit the plan to achieve the objectives. That would have the effect of winning the war more quickly and reducing the military and civilian casualties for Ukraine and the damage that's being done to the infrastructure of the country.
And in terms of the plans and the strategy, don't you think that West is a bit slow in giving its support to Ukraine because Russia is mobilizing much faster than we are ready to protect our country?
Well, time is on the side of Russia. That's part of the problem. That's why there has to be more of a sense of urgency coming from the West. Russia's 4 times bigger than Ukraine. Yeah. It's true that Western sanctions have hurt Russia. Its gross national product maybe down 10% this year, but Ukraine's was down 40%. And in a battle of attrition, that benefits Russia. We don't want to fight that kind of war. And so the way to put maximum pressure on Russia is to make it clear that we're not prepared to fight indefinitely. We're prepared to fight to win sooner rather than later, obviously in a prudent, carefully planned way. But that's what we need to apply more attention to, not every week debating weapon system A versus weapon system B.
Yeah, I see. Can Ukraine retake its whole territory till the end of 2023? Is it possible?
Well, it seems to me that it is possible. The Russian military performance across all of its combat arms has defied prediction. Certainly, it doesn't show anything like what Western intelligence thought the outcome would be at the beginning of the war. Ukrainian performance by all elements of the military has been outstanding. I will say on our part, we've provided extensive intelligence and equipment and weapons and ammunition, and we're pleased to do it to help Ukraine win, because a Ukrainian victory is an American and NATO victory as well. And to try to explain to people around the world, this is not just a European war. This really is a world war at this stage. So tomorrow in Washington, the relatively new Prime Minister of Japan, Kishida, will meet with President Biden. Japanese have provided assistance to Ukraine, something that's really unprecedented. We've seen South Korea selling weapons to Poland. They understand what the threat of Russian aggression means. They're very close to it on the Asian side of Russia. So the attention of the world really is focused here, and to utilize that attention to maximum effect, we need to try and win this war and show that Russia's aggression has failed. And if we show that lesson, it will tell something to the Russians and tell something to the Chinese in Asia and elsewhere in the world.
Let's imagine if you served as national security advisor under the President Volodymyr Zelensky. What would be your strategy? What would be your advice?
Well, I think he did an outstanding job, I will say, in his speech to Congress. And I think it won a lot of credit for Ukraine and its people. And I think overwhelmingly, as I say, Americans sympathize with Ukraine. He needs to keep doing it. I know he's got a country to govern in wartime conditions, but this is a coalition effort in effect, and it's just a reality of political life that it takes a lot of time and attention, especially to counter Putin's efforts to break Western solidarity, which is not as strong as some people think it is. And I think participation by everybody in the Ukraine government, including from Parliament, and their visits around Europe and the United States are very helpful. And I would hope President Zelensky would press NATO and the White House in particular to develop this kind of strategy that I'm talking about. Obviously, we would do it in full cooperation with Ukraine. If we're all on the same page, it makes it a lot easier to get everybody to do their part.
So what can actually change the situation on the ground right now? More HIMARS, more Western tanks, or not just Patriots, or we're not just talking about the weapons itself, we're talking about the strategy. What can change the ground?
Well, in the Donbass region now, as southern Ukraine generally, the Russians are heavily dug in. Their fortifications are strong. As I said earlier, putting Valery Gerasimov in charge of the struggle shows how determined the Russians are. So we need to think of ways to break through the Russian defenses without fighting this like it's World War I. And I think one way you do this to avoid trench warfare and the very high casualties that we've already seen associated with that during the past 11 months is to continue to strike Russian supply areas behind the lines, including in Russia, and debilitate their ability to defend their perimeter. And I think that ought to be a high priority.
The last question. So if Putin pushes the nuclear button, will we enter the World War III?
Well, I don't think he's going to do that. I think he's been bluffing.
But if he just imagine, if he just pushes this button.
Well, I think it would be a catastrophic event for Russia because there would be no doubt whether he used a tactical nuclear weapon in Ukraine or against a NATO country. We would not let that go unanswered, and I think the response should be very devastating. I think that is Vladimir Putin signing his own death warrant at that point.
He'd better never doing this. Thank you so much for being the guest of the Spotlight Ukraine, and on behalf of all the Ukrainians, thank you for your support and the support of all the Americans. Ambassador John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor under former President Donald Trump, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine, and we continue. For an effective counteroffensive, Ukraine needs favorable weather conditions, in particular prolonged frosts, as well as a sufficient amount of military equipment. This week, it became known about new assistance from France, the United States, and Poland. In a conversation with Volodymyr Zelensky, Emmanuel Macron promised that France would send light tanks and Bastion armored personnel carriers to Ukraine. The White House reported that the United States will provide us with an additional $3 billion in military aid. And during the trilateral meeting of the presidents of Ukraine, Lithuania and Poland, which took place on January 11th in Lviv, Andrzej Duda promised a company of Leopard 2 tanks. This is about 14 combat machines. And Lithuania will provide anti-aircraft systems and air defense. Hundreds of Lviv residents came to thank the president of Poland for the support we receive from our neighbors in the war with Russia. Within an informational war Russia has started against Ukraine, the Kremlin propaganda machine never stops. While making fakes, Moscow creates a whole made-up world built on lies. Its perception is based on narratives which promote a particular perspective. Most frequent narratives Russia has used during this week, next in our weekly review.
Russia is a victim. While attacking peaceful Ukrainian cities, Kremlin has always made excuses to justify its aggression. A statement that the West wants to destroy Russia is one of them. Russian propaganda claims that Ukraine is not a sovereign state, but an anti-Russian project, financed by the West to destabilize Russia.
It's very difficult for Russian propaganda to explain why Russia is still fighting small towns in Donbass and cannot get any signs of victory or in many months. So that is why Russian propaganda tries to explain to their own audience, to Russian citizens, that Russia fights not with Ukraine, but with the whole NATO, with the whole Western world.
Within this narrative, Politnavigator's pro-Kremlin news agency publication states that Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has made an announcement that after the occupation, Kyiv would hand over Crimea and Donbass to Russophobic Westerners. However, this is a fabricated quote. In Zelensky's annual address to the Ukrainian parliament on December the 28th, he did not say anything about planning to hand out any territory to the alleged Russophobes.
We will also restore normal life in Donbass and Crimea, which have been illegally occupied in 2014 and have since been brought to the point of catastrophe by the occupiers. For now, it is difficult to estimate the required number of resources. However, we can say that we should prioritize restoring those companies that have been or come to Ukraine during the war.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has also invoked World War II to justify Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Allegedly, Russia's offensive aimed to denazify Ukraine. Following this narrative, Russian Telegram channels used photos of Third Reich Christmas decorations from exhibitions in German museums to claim that Ukrainians decorate Christmas trees with swastikas. The Stop Fake Project journalists debunked the fake.
Two photos showing Christmas decorations with Nazi symbols on a Christmas tree were taken back in 2013 in Ulm at the Museum Brot and Kunst exhibition of Third Reich Christmas tree ornaments. There are many publications about this exhibition in German, English and Russian.
Finding justifications for its war crimes is such a Russian thing to do. One more example is Russia's statement that a mass missile strike in the eastern city of Kramatorsk had killed more than 600 Ukrainian forces. The Kremlin says it was in retaliation for a Ukrainian attack on a Russian base that killed dozens of Russian soldiers on New Year's Eve. However, they targeted civilian infrastructure again. So what is the reason then for other numerous Russian attacks on peaceful Ukrainian cities and towns? By using different languages, Kremlin media are spreading the narrative that the world can change its opinion about the aggressor country because of its dependence on Russian oil and gas. Within this message, a pro-Kremlin News.ru website publication claims that the International Monetary Fund has allegedly admitted that half of the countries of the European Union will face a recession in 2023 due to Ukraine. In fact, the so-called journalists manipulated the quote of Kristalina Georgieva, managing director of the International Monetary Fund.
Actually, the world has proven to be more resilient than we feared a year in the beginning of the year. We look at the response to the energy shock in Europe, and Europe is moving towards independence from Russia decisively. Yes, there will be a tough winter. Maybe the next one would be even tougher. But freedom from dependence on Russia is coming.
Putin protects Russia. The majority of Russia's fakes are aimed at the Russians themselves. This way, Kremlin is supporting the imaginary picture of the world created for Russians.
Number one aim of Putin and his friends is to keep the power in Russia. And they expected the very short, brief operation that supposed to help them to keep support of Russian population of Putin and his cronies.
Russian President Vladimir Putin positions himself as a president close to the people who allegedly protects Russia from all evil. And to prove this, Putin constantly communicates with people through different visits. However, the Russian president has a track record of posing at events where some attendees are not what they seem to be. A BBC Russian investigation in 2020 found that some events presented as impromptu conversations with everyday people were actually filled with friendly local officials.
And now it's high time to talk about the global politics, and hopefully we do have our global news editor Yuri Fizer, who's already in the studio. Hello, and what countries are we going to talk about today?
Hello, Volodymyr. We'll talk about Taiwan, a small island near the Chinese coast. Why is this freedom-loving territory very often on the front lines, and why it has become a bone of contention between China and the United States of America? And what is most important, why the relations with Taipei are so important for Kyiv? This and more in my part of Spotlight Ukraine. So, for 9 months already, Taiwan Taiwan has not hesitated to support Ukraine in a struggle that inspired the inhabitants of the island to confront their threat from China and some to join the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine. So why are the relations with Taiwan so important for Ukraine? Taiwan supports us very much in our fight for freedom. We get a lot of help from people living there. Moreover, it is our promise and trade partner with which we need to develop bilateral relations. And by the way, this is what deputies of Ukrainian parliament do. Taiwan provided Ukraine with over 30 million in humanitarian aid and joined the sanctions against Moscow. Already on February 28th, Taiwan sent 27 tons of medical materials to Ukraine. Through the special fund, $33 million were collected to help Ukrainians. On February 25th, Taiwan introduced sanctions against Russia and in the spring expanded the list by banning the export of a number of high-tech products, including microchips, lasers, navigation systems. About this and more, I will talk right now with my guest, member of the Ukrainian Parliament and co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China, Oleksandr Merezhko. Mr. Merezhko, greetings and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
So, Mr. Merezhko, my first question to you will be as follows. What can Ukraine gain from the cooperation with Taiwan?
I think a lot of things. But first of all, to me, it's a morally right solution to support Taiwan because both countries, Taiwan and Ukraine, are democratic states. And in the global struggle between the world of democracy and freedom against the world of authoritarian regimes, the world of autocracy, we should be on the same side. Additionally, we receive a lot of support from our Taiwanese friends because they have introduced very serious sanctions against the aggressor state, against Russia. Economically, if we develop our relations, they might be mutually beneficial and fruitful for both countries. So we need to develop all aspects of relations between our states. And we have also a lot in common. First of all, both countries, Ukraine and Taiwan, live in the shadow of sort of empires which threaten their existence. That's why we should support each other. We are democracies, and by supporting each other, we strengthen democracy worldwide.
How can the Russian war in Ukraine affect the rapprochement between Kyiv and Taipei?
I think it's inevitable in a way, because Taiwan and case of Ukraine are viewed as very similar. The thing is that if Ukraine fails and if Russia succeeds, it will send a signal to China, and China can start aggression against Taiwan. On the other hand, if we survive and when we attain a victory over the aggressor, it will improve situation around the Taiwan Strait. It will improve security of Taiwan. And in a paradoxical, strange way, despite geographical distance, both countries are related between each other.
Mr. Oleksandr, should we look back at Beijing's reaction, and is it worth hoping that China can become a guarantor of Ukraine's security or somehow force Russia to stop the war?
I don't believe in this for several reasons. First of all, we remember that China and Russia, on the eve of Russian full-scale invasion of Ukraine, they had created what they call strategic partnership without limits. In reality, Russia right now is a junior partner of China, and it's becoming more and more dependent upon China. For this reason, we cannot rely and we cannot trust China at all. Secondly, China provides economic help to Russia by buying in large quantities Russian natural resources. In fact, it finances Russian war machine, which is dangerous to Ukraine. And we shouldn't also forget that China is spreading and amplifying Russian propaganda, Russian propagandistic narratives against regarding Russian war against Ukraine.
So you've already talked about the similarity between two super powerful countries, China and Russia. So if Ukraine wins, China loses or not?
I think yes, because each time democracy wins over autocracy, autocracy and authoritarian regime are defeated. So in this regard, Ukrainian victory, which is inevitable, will inevitably strengthen democracy in the whole world, and it will make authoritarian regimes like Russia, like China, less powerful.
Mr. Merezhko, can rapprochement with Taiwan be considered the end of the Ukraine's strategic partnership with China?
I think so. You know, this to me, this strategic partnership had ended on the February 24th. I don't believe that it's realistic to get China on our side. China is not interested in defeat of Russia because Russia is a partner, is a junior partner to China, and China is trying to sort of assimilate Russia, to turn it into its vassal. And for this reason, China is not interested in Ukrainian victory. I don't believe that China is sincere about its attempts to seek peace, because even though it tries to pretend to be neutral, in reality, this is kind of neutrality on the side of Russia.
But don't we need China to try to at least to force Russian government to stop the war in Ukraine?
If China wanted to do that, they would definitely do it, and they would have done it already. But we don't see anything of that. We only hear rhetoric, empty rhetoric about peace, about diplomatic or political solution. But we don't see any deeds, any true attempts to stop Russia. China can stop Russia, but China is not doing anything for that.
So, and my last question to you for today, Mr. Merezhko. So far, Ukraine has not recognized the independence of Taiwan. Can we at least assume that it will be the next step in our development of the bilateral relations?
Well, in the foreseeable future, I don't see any prospect for that, for a very simple reason, because we continue to stick to the so-called one China policy. And we are not going to recognize Taiwan as an independent state. And interestingly enough, Taiwan itself doesn't recognize itself to be, at least from legal point of view, independent from the mainland China.
But what about the long-term perspective?
Well, first of all, I believe that we need to follow example of civilized democratic European countries and to establish in Ukraine, in Kyiv, a representative office, economic and cultural representative office of Taipei. We can follow, for example, example of Poland, which already has such an office, such a representative office, and it doesn't lead to any complications or problems with the mainland China. We can start with this because it's a necessary step to develop further our economic, political, and cultural relations.
And I think you'll start it, and good wishes to you with this. So this was Oleksandr Merezhko, the member of the Ukrainian Parliament and co-chair of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. Thank you very much for joining us today. So that's all for today, Volodymyr. We talked about Taiwan and about why the relations with this freedom-loving country are so important for Kyiv. And I think, and I hope they will be developed in the future.
I do have the last question. Have you ever been to Taiwan?
No, but I would want to.
Yes, you will definitely do that in the future.
So that's all for today. Back to you.
Thank you, Yuri. Our global news editor, Yuri Fizer, was in the studio with the latest updates in the global politics. And now we're going to talk about the rapprochement between Ukrainian and Indian cultures. The Indian RRR film has won the Golden Globe Award for the Best Original Song. In fact, one of the most vivid scenes of this movie has been filmed on the territory of the Mariinsky Palace in Kyiv. The blockbuster is in Telugu, one of the 22 official languages of India. It has been shot for several years, and one scene was filmed in Kyiv in August 2021. The film was released in March 2022 and is available for viewing on Netflix. That's all for today. That was Spotlight Ukraine. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and have a good week.